Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your Sunday to spend this time. I'm really keenly interested in sharing some thoughts with you, but I want to start with a disclaimer, which is, I make no assertions that anything I say is absolute truth. I don't really believe there's any absolute truth. I think that truth is fluid. And if you look at all of human history, there's evidence of that we sort of anchor to something as truth until we get more information, and then we upgrade what we understand. So what I'm going to share with you today is my understanding as of this moment. And hopefully, as soon as the words leave my mouth, my understanding will continue to grow and expand. But it's certainly been an interesting journey. And Wendy, I've been on this journey almost the entire time with you and Victor, and I'm so grateful to you. And for anyone who's new, I don't know if there's anyone new to mediumship and continuity of consciousness in the afterlife, but a book that really made a difference for me at the beginning of this, because I needed people who sort of thought left. I'm an oncology researcher by training, so probably far too left-brained for this very right-brained activity. But this book of Wendy and Victor was a godsend to me early on, because they gave me sort of left brain, you could present it in a court of law kind of evidence. And that's what I needed. So just the very short backstory, and I don't want to take a ton of time, but the love of my life was hit by a car and killed 5.5 years ago. And it started me on this journey to discover if there was scientific evidence of the continuity of consciousness. And at that time, I didn't know anyone who even knew a medium, but I went in search of that, and it started a journey for me that I couldn't have anticipated. And I always, as a newbie, you look for the people who know more than you, which in my case was everyone. And I wanted to, what do? We hang our hat on people that say that they know, especially when you know nothing. But what I found in the mediumship community, or any community, let's say, but there's certainly beliefs that we all have, and that people had told me early on were the truth, and I didn't know better, so that's the truth as far as I could tell. But as I traveled the journey myself and began a meditative practice and began connecting with spirit, some of those things I wasn't absolutely certain that they were true. So I'm going to present to you today some beliefs that I've encountered that seem to be almost sacrosanct. And then I'm going to provide you with another possibility. And I want you to notice if you push up against, when I bring up one that's uncomfortable for you, like, oh, but that's true, Cheryl. Don't be taking that away from me. I just want you to notice if it pulls a string in you, pushes a button in you. And I want you to then relax and just say, what if? What if, not that it's false, but what if it's partially true instead of completely true? So, first of all, I do want to say that in our Western educational model, you go to school, they give you a textbook, and they say, in this book is the right answers. So memorize the answers, then we're going to give you a test. And if you get an A on the test, then you know the right answers. And then pretty much we stop looking because someone has told us that in this book is the right answers. And I think we are tending as humans to be always looking for the right answer. And I think on some level, if we're looking for absolute truth or the right answer, sometimes we're missing the point. So one day in my meditation, well, first of all, every day I say in my meditation, before my meditation starts, my declaration is, anyone who serves the light is welcome here. Like, I open the door to anyone who serves the light. And so sometimes I know who steps in and sometimes I don't. But I'm more interested in the information, the wisdom, than I am in the who is giving it. And I'm lucky if I can discern both. But what I heard one day when I was asking for wisdom was this exact quote. Be careful of the mesmerizing bias of what you think you know. I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Like the mesmerizing bias of what we think we know. I was so intrigued with that. And it really, in a very loving way, put me in my place. Like, don't get too big for your britches here. Stay open and don't worry about quote unquote right answers. So I just want to see my notes here. Our beliefs, if you believe something to be true, then that's the lens through which you're perceiving the world. But if it's not completely true, then you're looking through a distorted lens, even if you're not aware that it's distorted. So to my way of thinking, answers are anchors. If we're going to use a sailing or riverboat mentality metaphor, answers are anchors and questions generate movement. And so if you look at the word question, like if you had a piece of paper and you could write down the word question, Questions, questions, if you look at that, it's two words. It's quest and ions. What's an ion? An ion is an electrical charge, a molecule or an atom with a net electric charge. So to me, I just played with it. Like, I'm on a quest for wisdom. And the ions are the energy, right? So it's quest, ions. I'm fueling my quest with questions, which create energy. And so I don't think we have to, I think right and wrong gets us in trouble. So how many times as mediums have we had a hard no? Nope, I don't know what that is. That's not true. My husband would never have said that. And then later on, they call you back or text you or message you and say, oh my God, that was totally right. Amnesia, mediumship amnesia. Or how many times have we gotten something that we felt was completely ridiculous, and then it turned out to be the most significant thing we could have said in the reading? So in my experience, we're constantly walking this tightrope of mediumistic tradition and spirit-inspired innovation, or at least I hope that's what we're doing, right? Because in my experience, spirit is constantly attempting to communicate with us, to convey new information, but we have to be open to new information in order to be able to receive it. But our belief system can certainly get in the way. Now, Wendy, if I remember correctly, in your book, you guys talk about Camille Flammarion, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so Camille Flammarion was a French astronomer, author, scientist in late 1800s, if memory serves. And I just have a couple of quotes from him that I want to put before I get to this list of beliefs. The first quote is, "Many are victims of intellectual superiority. They are self-satisfied and quite comfortable with their truth. The unknown and impossible of yesterday may be recognized tomorrow as truth." And then he went on to say, "Scientific sagacity consists in being very careful how we deny the possibility of anything." And I thought that was so wise. And the last one I want to share is, "We know absolutely nothing. All our judgments are relative, and therefore, by their nature, they are partial." So I'm going to go through my little list of the beliefs, and these are just ones that came to mind as I was preparing for today. I'm going to go through the list. I want you to notice if it pushes any buttons, like this is my belief, don't be messing with my belief. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to share with you some what ifs that I have encountered that had me question the wholeness of the truth, not necessarily that there isn't truth contained within these things. And I'd also like to say that I think we, as three-dimensional humans, we obviously look through our three-dimensional lens at things that sometimes have a fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. dimensional aspect that we don't have a capacity to understand. So here's the list, in no particular order. Reincarnation is real, and that means multiple lives lived consecutively, one after another. The veil is thinning. It takes a long time to learn to connect with spirit. You have to be a born medium. You periodically need to clean or clear your chakras. Love is the highest, most powerful frequency in the universe. You cannot connect with historical figures like Nikola Tesla or John F. Kennedy or Princess Diana without their loved ones being present. So those are just some that I've encountered. And so I'm going to go back through and just give you some other possibilities. So the idea of multiple lives lived consecutively, can I get a show of hands, like people who remember Jane Roberts and Seth, the channelings from, yeah, okay. I think it was 1970s-ish. But here's a quote from Seth and Jane Roberts. "It is not correct to suppose that your actions in this life are caused by a previous existence. The lives are simultaneous." And that's a heady concept. It took me a long time to sort of be able to wrap my head around this idea of the simultaneity of past, present, and future. But just sit with that for a second. And then this idea of the veil is thinning. And I asked about that one day because people comment about that all the time. And again, I don't think that it's necessarily wrong, but I think it's partial. And my perception is that the veil isn't like some spiritual Great Wall of China and everybody in the spirit world's on one side of it and we're on the other side of it. I believe that the veil is over our own eyes. So my veil might be thinning because I'm actively working on it. But some woman in a diner in Boston who's never thought anything spiritual in her life, her veil may not be thinning. And I don't know that there isn't also a thing where as we rise and converge and sort of advance spiritually, maybe that helps bring other people into an awareness. But I thought that was an interesting idea, that each of us individually has a veil over our own eyes and we thin our own veil through our spiritual work. So the idea of it taking a long time to learn to connect with spirit, I want to push back on that in that I'm going to use Mexico for Lourdes and Angie. If I want to go to Mexico and I don't speak Spanish, I can get a little conversational phrase book and I can learn how to order, dos cervezas, por favor, and donde es el baño. I can do a couple of little things if I have that language. And so I can learn to communicate effectively, but I'm certainly not going to then sign up for a job as a translator. So I think with new people, we have to be careful, because as soon as you say it takes a really long time to connect, you already put someone who may be in grief or may be struggling, and you're telling them, oh, good luck, it's going to take you a really long time. I don't think it takes a really long time to be conversationally fluent. I think it takes a long time before you become a translator, which I think is then maybe what would be considered a practicing medium. The idea of being a born medium, I think, is another way that we shoot new people in the foot, because quantum physics proposes with evidence that each proton inside your cell, inside your atom, all those protons are connected to all the other protons in the universe. So this idea of entanglement, I think we're all born mediums. Doesn't mean that it's like we all could have the capacity, as long as we have hands or feet, we could learn to play the piano. I just think we oversimplify and make something into a rule that shuts people down. And I don't know that that's useful. So this idea of periodically needing to clean or clear your chakras, I'm not going to belabor that, but if we go to, again, to quantum physics, this idea of your energy centers, your chakras, are loaded with information, and we have to learn how to translate or activate. It's like light switches that could be turned off, could be turned on. But I don't necessarily think of thinking them, if I believe that they're dirty and need to be cleaned, then that becomes my reality, and for me, that's what has to happen. So I'd say just be careful of other people's boxes and other people's ideas. I'm not saying that's true or not true. I'm saying for me, it's not true. And if someone's giving you a box being a belief system, be careful about taking on other people's boxes. Now, this next one really interests me because it sort of blew my mind. And it's the one that is love is the, we all, I think we mostly believe that love is the highest frequency in the universe. It's the most powerful energy force. And so I was listening to a channeled transmission, and the being that was coming through shared a slightly different perspective that changed my perspective. And what he said was, love is the highest frequency energy form that can be experienced by the dualistic individual. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't mean, so to me, I was excited because it means maybe there's something even bigger. Like when we go to the spirit world, maybe there's an even larger thing than what it is we call love. So, and the one that I really want to talk about today is this last one, which is you cannot connect with historical figures without their loved ones being present. And I'm going to push back on that because, so where this started for me was a few years ago, two different mediums, one in the UK and one in the United States, had, in a very crabby manner, insisted that you can't just willy-nilly reach out to historical figures. And if you could, even if you could, there wouldn't be evidence. And I thought, well, that's a pretty small box. I don't know if I believe that. I mean, I've had one, at that point, I had had one experience that countered their declaration. So I'm going to share with you what happened. And when I heard those statements from them, I wasn't buying it because I had had firsthand experience with that not being accurate from my own personal N of one experience. So in 2018, and I don't know if I've ever shared this story, Wendy, but in 2018, so Scott had died in 2017 in July. So August of 2018, right before I met you and Victor in September of 2018, Wendy, I was meditating, and I found in my grief that meditation was the only time I wasn't in pain. So I was meditating 2 hours a day for over a year, and all kinds of crazy stuff was happening. So I'm meditating, and I'm not thinking about anything or anyone per se, and all of a sudden I have an awareness of Nikola Tesla. Now, at that point, I didn't really know much at all about Nikola Tesla. Something about he was Serbian American and lived in New York, and something about energy, frequency, and vibration. But I'm ashamed to say I didn't really know very much about him. So there's Nikola Tesla, and it's just me. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't have to prove this to anybody else. So I say, well, how can I help you? And at the time, the working title of a book I'm working on had the word infinity in the title. And he said, if you're going to use the word infinity in the title of your book, you need to know what infinity is. And I said, okay, so if we could just back up, if you could give me some evidence that it's you, I'm still learning, I'm new to all of this. If you could give me some evidence that this is you, that would be helpful. So he says, I used to live in Colorado Springs. And I'm thinking, that's not likely. I knew he was in New York, but I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, that's not likely. And he says, look it up. So I open my laptop during my meditation. I open my laptop, I type in Nikola Tesla, Colorado Springs. Sure enough, he used to live in Colorado Springs. Alrighty then. So he then gives me the title of a book that he says I need to read this book if I want to understand what infinity is. So I'm, again, thinking in my mind, what are the chances that that's the title to a book? So he says, look it up. I Google the title, I put in the phrase he gave me, and sure enough, it's a book. It was written like in the 90s or so, a long time ago. And that was the end of that. So I read the book. The book blows the hinges off my doors completely. It completely altered my visceral sense. It gave me a visceral sense of infinity. And so now I had questions, but I didn't know if the author was dead or alive. And I sent a letter and it came back. And anyway, there was one more name in the book, and I reached out to that person, and he responded back. He didn't know if this guy was still alive, but he was a co-author and he'd try to answer my questions. So I called this man, and all I want to do is ask my questions. And we're on the phone, and my list is typed out because I'm that girl. And he says, whoa, 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 whoa. Who are you? What's your story? Nobody's ever heard of that book. How did you find out about the book? What's going on? So I think, you know what? I got nothing to lose. So I tell this guy, okay, my boyfriend died, and mediums and meditating, and then whatever. Okay, Nikola Tesla showed up in my meditation, even if that sounds crazy. And then all of a sudden I have this thought. I said, is there any chance that there's any connection between you or the other author and Mr. Tesla? And he's quiet for a minute, and he says, yes, there is. All my little Scooby senses are electrified. And he said, my father was a physicist, and he worked with Mr. Tesla back in the day. Wow. So I'm completely amazed that this is happening. And then the most amazing thing happened, you guys. I've got my little type list. We're on the phone, and he starts answering the questions on my list without my asking them, in the order that they appear on the page. So, mystical experience, yes. Can I tell you more? No. But it was my first example of someone like, you know, a historical figure could show up and there could be evidence. So, the one thing I want to back up, because I know other people will listen to this afterwards, and I do have some other stories I want to share of examples of possibilities and how I ask. But I do believe that there should be a code of ethics, or an agreed upon code of ethics with regards to mediumship. Because I know there's a lot of people that have some strong opinions about, when you should hang a shingle out and do readings for people. But so my basic code of ethics, for 2 years, I asked friends and family and strangers if I could practice with them, but I was not a practicing medium. I was just practicing mediumship. But my code of ethics at this point is don't lie, do no harm, serve spirit first, and if you're going to accept compensation for your time, I never ask for this in advance. Because if someone is not happy, if the reading doesn't go well, it's a wash. I serve spirit anyway. If they want to compensate me for their time after the reading, that's great. But I don't personally believe in accepting any kind of remuneration in advance. So just for what that's worth, I do believe that it's important to follow a code of ethics. And the thing I want to say to others about building a mediumship practice, if you will, is that if I were to drive from here to my downtown, there's homes and office buildings and barns and things along the way. And the key to any building is a foundation. And all of those buildings have one thing in common, that is a foundation. But the barn definitely has a different structure, interior and exterior, than the mansion on the hill versus my condominium. So having a foundation of the spiritual teachings that are the foundational spiritual teachings of mediumship, I think is incredibly valuable. But I think where we get stuck is that there are those who believe that there's a right way and a wrong way. And there can be some shaming and some, things that go on that I see do damage to people, rather than, do you have a foundation? Let us help you build one if you don't. And then be open and malleable and build a partnership between you and spirit so that you can develop your mediumship under the tutelage and guidance of spirit. So that's my little disclaimer about that. Because I think that when we get rigid and dogmatic in our mediumship with ideas of right and wrong, then we don't, the thing we do the most is we shut the door between us and spirit. So about this whole idea of reaching out to historical figures, for me, I think that the part that's most exciting, I have a public and a private face to my mediumship. My public facing part of my mediumship is doing readings for people. And my private face is my own spiritual development and me being a medium for myself. And how am I going to advance spiritually but to ask for wisdom? And so it started with anyone who serves the light who wants to give me wisdom. Yes, please. And then sometimes I would experiment with asking, both privately and just among friends, just to see, just because we were curious and wanted to see what would happen. But I want to share something that physicist John Wheeler said when he was contemplating the idea of the direction of time only being one, we can look into the future or we can look into the past. So only having two directions. What he said was one direction might be quite likely. The other direction, because what he's wanting to do is like, yes, we can look into the past, but what if we could remember the past and we could remember the future? That was the question. So he says one direction might be quite likely, the other direction ridiculously, incredibly unlikely. Yet unlikely is not quite the same as impossible. An infinitesimally small or non-zero probability is radically different than something that is impossible. So can we reach out to historical figures and ask them for wisdom? And of one, I can say, yes, I have had enough evidence to prove that for myself. And the very angry medium that said that isn't possible, so it's not possible for her. That's okay. But I think that we have to be careful when we make these blanket statements because we don't know everything, any of us. And so I want you to think about the word decide, D-E-C-I-D-E. If you think about decide, and then you think about genocide or homicide or herbicide, CIDE is about killing things. It's about killing the plants. So if you decide, you're killing all the other options. So be careful with the things that you decide and ask yourself whether fluidity might be a better choice. And if you think about Galileo or Da Vinci or Einstein or Tesla or Amelia Earhart or Jesus or Lindbergh, these were people who bucked the system. They thought outside the box and they said, what if something else is possible? And so I think being open and curious, be a wonderologist, and in my experience, more is possible than we even can begin to imagine. So pretty much my goal is to seek, I'll go where they lead me. As long as it's someone who serves the light, I'll go where they lead me. But beware of those who tell you that something is impossible. So I want to get to some of the stories because I'm intrigued. So I told you the Nikola Tesla story. I want to tell you a John F. Kennedy story. And Mr. Kennedy has been someone, and again, I cannot definitively tell you that Nikola Tesla showed up. I can tell you that evidence was given, so we make an assumption that it was him, just like if I give you a reading about your mother and it's evidential, we give them the benefit of the doubt. So I was doing an experiment with a friend and I said, pick a historical figure and we'll ask that person for wisdom for you. And so she chose John F. Kennedy. So my little exercise is, okay, you wrap Mr. Kennedy and you in an embrace, an energetic embrace of love. and I'll ask him for the evidence, or I'll ask him for the wisdom. Because the priority is the wisdom, not the evidence, but the silent request is, if you could give us evidence, that would be helpful. And I know, Wendy, I am going to give us enough time to, to ask questions. So Mr. Kennedy hands me a can of tomato soup. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm totally making this up. And he says, you promised. So I said, okay. He's handing you a can of tomato soup. And then I go back and I ask for the wisdom. And he goes through this whole thing, and this thing that was going on in my friend's life that I didn't know. He said it doesn't start as soup. It starts as a seed. And you have to put that seed in soil, and you tamp it down, and you water it every day, and it appears like nothing's happening. And you have to be patient, and you keep nurturing it even though you can't see the progress. And then it grows, and it's a plant, but there's no fruit. And then the fruit grows, but it's still not soup, and the fruit is ripe, and then you pick it, and it's still not soup, and you got to go into the kitchen. There's more work to do. Anyway, it was about her being patient with a process. And at the end, I asked him, do you have some evidence that this is you? And he says to me, look it up. And I knew what he meant. So I go to the internet and I type in John F. Kennedy tomato soup. I have no idea what's going to happen. And up pops, the very first thing that popped up was an article from the Baltimore Sun. And it listed the favorite foods of the 45 presidents. And John F. Kennedy's favorite food was tomato soup. So I can't prove to you that it was him, but it was sure delightful in that moment. And I can tell you, and I know that we're going to run short on time, so I just want to tell you that what Mr. Kennedy, I've interacted with him on a number of occasions, and a couple of years ago he said to me, you need to make people aware that we are here and we want to help and no one is asking. And that's the point, is if we don't ask, they can't step in or intercede past a certain point if we don't ask. They need the invitation. So if you have a private spiritual practice, invite. It doesn't cost anything. And isn't it interesting to see what might be possible? So I'm going to give you another example, and I have many more, but I want to save time for some questions. So I'm just going to give you another story. This one was from Abraham Lincoln. And so, again, I was doing this exercise with this friend. Pick a historical figure. She picks Mr. Lincoln. And you wrap him in the bubble of love. I'll ask for the gift. And so he steps in, and I see him in my mind's eye, and he reaches his hand into his pocket, and he pulls out a pocket knife. And I can see that it's personalized. And he says, to this friend, I want to give you my personal pocket knife as a gift. And he said, you need to whittle away all the things in your life that are weighing you down. She's someone with a lot of angst and baggage and things. Said, you don't need a hatchet. Just whittle them away. You can use my knife. And then, is there any evidence? And he says, go look it up. So I go to the internet and I Google it, and up pops on June 16th, 1864. Mr. Lincoln was in Philadelphia doing a speech at the Grand Fair. And at that fair, he was given a gift of a mother of pearl pocket knife inlaid with a gold plaque that had his name, Abraham Lincoln. So again, what happens in that moment is joy. And I don't have to prove it to the world, but if I can take then the wisdom that they share with me, I am growing spiritually in a way that I would never be able to do if I was reading all the books in the world. So there are possibilities, I guess is my assertion today, to be careful of the boxes and realize that there are possibilities perhaps past what we might consider. And, so I think that I want to leave time for questions. So I want to just say to you the pieces that I feel are non-negotiable as far as making progress in a pursuit. If you wanted to, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about protecting myself. I feel like spirit will take care of that. and yet I always make a declaration because I want to be clear that I serve the light and anyone who serves the light is welcome here. But I ask. And there's a wonderful book, which I don't know if I've ever shared this with you before, Wendy, but it's called Talking with Angels. And it's by Gita Miles. It's an amazing book. Don't spend more than $40 for it. They're kind of somewhat rare, but you can find them, and don't spend $400. You should be able to get it for $30 or $40. But what it is it's a channeled transmission over an 18-month period between 1942 and 1943 in Hungary, as Hitler was marching towards Hungary. This group of young people, all in a spiritual practice and all concerned about what was happening. And one day, one of the three, there were three Jewish girls and one who was not Jewish, and one of the three Jewish girls dropped into a trance and started channeling these angels. And it's an incredibly powerful book, and every Friday afternoon for 18 months, these angels would show up. And so the reason I share that with you is because there's a quote from that book, from those angels, that reads, "Those who ask are more dear to the divine than those who know." Those who ask are more dear to the divine than those who know. And then it's followed with, "You are capable of more in every sense." So if we think about our souls as unchanging, then we, on some level, we cast a spell, right, that is self-fulfilling. So stay open and own your mediumship so that spirit can unfold you. But when you hold back, you inhibit spirit's capacity, all spirit's capacity, to interact with you. So dare to be original, boldly own your mediumship, stay true to the way that spirit is leading you, and realize that all truth is partial. And human history has ample examples of that. So ask, and ask yourself, what if? What if it's real? What if it's not? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? What if this is true? What if it isn't? But what if it's the midpoint on a scale? You got to believe to receive. So